Hey everyone, welcome. This is lesson for characteristics of life, meaning what makes something alive versus not alive. This is Unit 0, Week 3, Day 2 and 3, as far as just labeling the lesson. A helpful resource for this lesson would be reading in your book, Unit 1.3, page 22 through 24. So 2 pages of reading that kind of goes over some of the topics that I'm going to be talking about in this PowerPoint. So please use your book as a resource because it is really, really important that you kind of know the list of the characteristics of life pretty well. Okay, so that being said, your objective for today is that you will be able to define the characteristics of all living things and use those or that list to argue whether or not a subject, like a person or an object, is living or non-living. Okay, and so up to this point, you guys have used the term, oh, something's alive or living, and something's not alive or it's dead. But in biology, again, we have these special words that kind of are better describers of specifically what you're talking about. Okay. And so, although we know what living versus non living means, we're going to add a layer of definition to that. Okay. So the first kind of step in doing that is understanding that in biology, to describe living things, we say biotic factors. Biotic factors. Okay. To be biotic, okay, is to be alive. Biotic means to be alive. That root word bio or bio is living. Okay. Some biotic factors or living factors would be animals and humans, potentially a disease like a virus. We could talk about food as in when it's growing. So that would be plants and trees. And we could talk about any sort of vegetable when it's connected to the ground and it's growing and utilizing the energy from the earth. Okay. Now, there's also abiotic factors. Those are non-living factors within our environment. Okay. Whenever you see a letter A in front of a word, okay, so if you notice, abiotic is just biotic with an A in front of it. An A usually means like the opposite of or anti whatever comes after that. Okay, so the opposite of living would be not living or not alive. Okay, so factors within our environments that are non-living an example would be like the temperature right outside. I can feel the temperature, but it is not alive and necessarily growing in a way that it would be taking in energy and then releasing energy. Okay, temperature works in a much different way. It is not living, and yet it influences our environment. Same with the amount of light or light intensity, right? The sun is not a living thing. It is simply part of our environment that helps things live, but it is not itself living. Same with pollution and water or moisture. Okay, it is not a living thing, but it helps living things stay alive. So that's the difference between biotic and abiotic. We will use these two terms throughout the year. These are very, very important vocab words that you need to know and practice. In class, we'll be doing a lot of examples of like what is living versus non-living, and trying to help you out in that sense, get a handle on this. But please, please, please make sure you are practicing using these words. Instead of saying living, use the word biotic. And instead of saying non-living, please use the word abiotic. So your next question might be, all right, So I know there's some things that are alive and some things that are not alive. With, some objects or some subjects, it's going to be really hard to tell if it's alive or not. What are the things that, or yeah, what is the absolute list of qualities that something must have in order to be considered alive? So right now we're going to make a list of all the things that that are necessary in order to be considered alive. Each slide will have a different part and some notes associated with what it looks like. So please be prepared for that. Okay, so the first thing on the list is that living things must be made of cells. You can be made of one cell or you can be made of multiple cells, but living things must be made of cells. Okay. When a living thing is only made out of one cell, we call that unicellular. The root word uni, U-N-I, meaning one. Unicellular, made of one cell. Okay, an example of that would be bacteria. Okay. An example of something that is multicellular or made of multiple cells would be a human. We will go over multiple examples of each of these unicellular and multicellular organisms. But again, the basics of this idea is that anything that's alive has to be made of cells. If it's not made of cells, right away, you can discount it as being alive. Because from what we know in research, over and over and over again, something cannot be living without the basic unit of life, which is the cell. Now, if we're going to highlight multicellular organisms and we're going to say, okay, what is the point of being multicellular? Well, you're going to be a lot more sophisticated of an organism if you are multicellular, made of many cells, because fascinatingly, your cells work together. Okay, the cells in your hand work together with the cells of your arm, which work together with the cells of your shoulder, and so on and so forth, all the way to your brain. Okay, and then your brain is then able to interact with your hand because all of those other cells are connected. And so we are made of layers. If you are a multicellular organism like humans, you are made of layers. And so on the right side of this PowerPoint, I have kind of a upside down triangle that says, or is kind of describing how cells are organized. You need to know this upside down triangle. It's something that will come up multiple times in this class. But this is kind of like the organization of a multicellular organism. Okay, the organization of a multicellular organism. If we were to take your entire body and break it down all the way, we would end up with atoms and molecules. So you kind of start down here at the smallest point. Atoms and molecules are the smallest units. So this is the smallest. And we kind of work our way up. I'll put an arrow, arrow going up. And we're going to make that red so you can see it. And at the top, we have our largest. Okay. So atoms and molecules are obviously small, and they make the elements that put together your cells. Okay, so we, at the kind of tip of our pyramid, we have atoms, molecules, cells, and those cells come together to form tissues. Those tissues come together to form organs. Those organs come together to form organ systems. And those organ systems come together to put together entire organisms. I would copy this down, but on the next slide, I have a picture of, how this actually plays out in a human body. So I'm going to come back to this slide in just a second. But, okay. So if I start off with my one cell, in my intestine, let's say, right next to my stomach, okay, my intestine cell. When a bunch of intestine cells come together, they make the lining for my intestine. Okay, so they start to group together and they're forming a tissue or the lining of my small intestine, for example. When all those cells come together as a tissue and those tissues then come together, we then form an entire organ. Okay, so for example, this would be the small intestine. Again, we started out with one cell. That cell grouped up with other cells that are just like it. Those cells form an entire piece of tissue. That tissue is then going to group together with other groups of tissue to make an entire organ. Now, we don't just have a small intestine, right? We also need a large intestine, and that same process happens to build a large intestine or your stomach or your gallbladder or your spleen or your, whatever other part of the digestive system, your esophagus. And when those organs come together, we have finally an organ system. Obviously, a human is made up of multiple organ systems, right? We have the respiratory system that helps you breathe. We have the digestive system, which helps you break down food. We have the nervous system, which helps your body communicate with itself and the outside world, right? So all these organ systems might be separate, but when they come together, they form a full and complete organism. Okay. Now, not every type of organism has all of these different organ systems. Okay. You could be an organism and only have one organ. So it really depends on the specific organism that we're talking about. But for the most part, this is the way that we build a human or any other type of multicellular organism. We start out with one cell. That cell is then multiplied, and all those cells that are completely identical come together and form tissue. Those tissues come together and form organs, complete, ready to go, ready to do its job organs. When those organs come together with the other organs that will help it finish the job, we call that an organ system. And those organ systems come together to basically help the entire organism function properly. Okay, so again, going back to that last slide, when we have a complete multicellular organism, it is made up of many different layers. If we were to break down those layers, we would see that the organism is made up of multiple organ systems. That organ system is made up of multiple different organs. Those organs may or may not be made up of different types of tissues. And those tissues were before made by specific individual cells. Those cells would not be able to form if there were not atoms and molecules involved in that process. Okay, so number one, all living things are made of cells. The next thing I want to talk about is that all living things can reproduce. Okay, all living things can reproduce. It's extremely important that you understand that the cycle of life stops if there's no reproduction. Okay, it doesn't matter how long that organism lives if it can't pass on its information to the next generation so that the species stays alive. Okay, and so reproduction, right, is kind of a taboo topic in our society, especially at your guys' age. But it's the only way to really describe a living thing, and a living thing that is going to continue to pass on its information. Sex is a huge part of biology, a huge part of continuing the life cycle. If reproduction cannot occur, it's just really not going to be, it's not alive. So anyways, there are different types of reproduction. Okay, there's the generic sexual reproduction where we have sex cells involved, and then that produces an offspring. You need two different parents, right? So a male and a female, as in the picture, right? They go through sexual intercourse, and then their sex cells, which are also known as gametes. That's an important word that we will use throughout the year. So sex cells are gametes, and that would be the sperm and the egg. They come together, and that cell, that one cell, remember, it starts out unicellular, and then as we create an entire human, it becomes multicellular. So mom and dad had sex, the sperm and the egg come together, that one cell is then going to multiply into what then becomes this little cute little baby human or chicken or a frog or whatever. Okay, so this is not just for humans. This is many different types of organisms that sexually reproduce, okay, to form the next generation. Now, and then the cycle continues. Now, there's a different type of reproduction called asexual reproduction, where no sex cells are involved. Okay, this is where we form clones. We will have an entire unit on this later on in the year. But right now, all I want you to understand about this is that your body reproduces itself asexually every single moment of every single day of your living life. Okay. Asexual reproduction is just making a clone. So if I clap my hand, a bunch of my hand cells are falling off and dying. Now, why don't I have a gaping hole in the middle of my hand from, touching the table and touching my computer and clapping my hands? It's because my hand cells are constantly asexually reproducing, making clones of themselves. Okay. It doesn't involve sex. It does not involve a penis and a vagina. All that your cells, every single cell in your body is doing is making a clone of itself, a copy. So that if it dies, pieces of you won't fall off of your body. You won't die immediately if your hand gets cut. Okay. So both sexual and asexual reproduction are essential for one, keeping a species alive, and two, keeping the individual alive. Okay, again, with the amount of we rub against our clothes, we rub against the bed, we bump into people, we open the door handle, we would cease to exist if our body cells weren't constantly making copies of themselves. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I can answer more questions during class. But the second way to check if something is alive is if it can reproduce. It can reproduce sexually or asexually or both. Okay, sexual reproduction is where we make an entirely new organism using two sex cells, a sperm and an egg. You need a male and a female to do that. Asexual reproduction, again, is our body's way of growing and keeping us alive by making clones of every single cell in your body so that you don't disappear or fade away as you touch things, as you bump into things, as you play soccer, as you fall down, whatever you're doing, you're losing cells. Okay. So again, the offspring or the new cell is exactly identical to the parent cell. Okay, so I get a lot of students asking me, so why is it important that a new organism gets the sperm and the egg? in order to become a full human. If you're looking at this picture on the right-hand side, right, sperm and egg come together during sexual intercourse, and we get one new complete cell that then becomes the baby or the new life. Um, and that leads us to kind of our third characteristic of life, which is that everything that is alive is based on a universal genetic code. So, inside each and every one of your cells, the millions of cells that you are made out of, there is a strand of DNA. DNA is the instruction book for how to make a human, a zebra, a horse, whatever it is. It has to have DNA from its parents. The only way you get DNA from your parents is if, when the sperm and egg come together, the sperm drops off its DNA contents into the egg. And then that new one cell will have a complete copy of all the information that it will need. So, again, the next characteristic of life is that everything is based off of this universal genetic code, which is DNA. If DNA is not present, then there will be no instructions on how to make that specific type of organism. There will be no instructions on how the cells are supposed to act. And therefore, the organism will not continue to live. So again, having DNA in each cell is important. Going back up to the top of the list, remember each organism or any living thing, any biotic factor has to be made of cells. Inside those cells, there is DNA. DNA gives instructions on how to build the body of a multicellular organism. In order to make a new multicellular organism, it has to go through sexual reproduction, where you get two organisms, two cells, the sex cells, egg and sperm. They drop off their genetic contents into this one cell and it becomes the new life. Or we have asexual reproduction, where your body cells are making copies of this DNA, exact identical clones, to keep growing your body or to replace damaged cells. Okay, so all of these, this entire list is interconnected. Again, just stating multiple times. Oop, something's happening with my dog. Okay, the next one on our list is that a living thing needs to be able to grow and develop. Okay, so going from a little baby to an adult to maybe a grandma or grandpa, or an older organism, right? Going from a small little seed to a large plant that produces fruits, or a large, vegetable, whatever it might be, going from small to large, or going from just one cell to an entire organism made of hundreds of thousands of millions of cells. So growth occurs through this growth occurs through this process called mitosis, and that's where cells make copies of themselves. Okay, again, going back to reproduction. Asexual reproduction is the way that we grow ourselves from babies to adults. Okay, going from little itty bitty bones to big strong bones, big strong muscles, all of that. That asexual reproduction has a process, and that process is called mitosis. Okay, cells making copies of themselves. So, again, we have sperm and egg coming together to make the zygote, which is the one cell that will then grow into an embryo, which is made of many cells. And then that will form into, for example, a tadpole. And that tadpole will then form into a frog. Again, it's not just about humans. This will be for any organism that is multicellular. It starts out as a zygote or a fertilized egg. That fertilized egg becomes an embryo, which is basically just made of many cells. That embryo will then become whatever that organism is. So, for instance, a tadpole, or this could be a human, or this could be a zebra, or this could be a giraffe. Okay, and then the adult form of whatever that is. Okay, so in this case again, we're going from sperm and egg from a frog, which forms a zygote, which then forms an embryo, which then forms a tadpole, and that tadpole becomes an adult frog. Okay, so growth and development is the next kind of not step, characteristic of life. Now, in order to grow and develop, you also need to be able to use energy. Okay. Use or break down energy. Okay. So energy is the ability to do work. We can't get energy unless we break down what we eat. And the process of breaking down what we eat is called metabolism. Okay. Metabolism. Metabolism is all of the chemical reactions in an organism. Okay, it breaks apart the, I don't know, the sausage you had for breakfast, or the clam chowder you ate at Pier 39 on, the wharf. The only way that you can physically function is because you have enough energy in each and every one of your cells for them to do their jobs. Okay. So if you are a living thing, you have to use energy. Otherwise, you're not alive. Okay. And the things that you use energy for, again, are to grow and develop, make copies of your DNA, reproduce your body or make new bodies. Okay. Build your body. Okay. That is all growth and development. Okay. So the need for energy has to do with the ability to be able to grow, develop, reproduce, and copy your own body. And finally, well, not finally, but the next one would be then responding to your environment. This is your behavior, okay, which is a set of responses to stimuli. Living things have to be able to protect themselves. If you don't know something is dangerous, then you're more likely to get hurt. So with this example of the touching the stove, right? Generally, if I touch a stove, it's going to burn me, and my immediate response would be to pull my hand back and scream, right? Because it hurt. The only reason I know it hurt was because there are little individual nerves on the ends or the tips of my fingers that help me or that send messages to my brain, and those messages tell my brain, hey, my skin's burning, a bunch of cells are dying. And my brain sends back a message saying, yeah, that's not good, we're going to lose the hand if all those cells die. So it sends a message not back to the fingertip, but to my shoulder and arm muscles for those muscles to yank back. That way I can get my hand out of the way. Okay, that's a reflex. I'm responding to the environment that I'm in. There's a hot stove. I'm touching the hot stove. My body has to respond by sending a message to my brain. Hey, is this okay for my body to be in this type of danger? My brain says yes or no and sends a response to either get out of there or it's okay, you can stay in that space. Okay. If you can't do that, you're more likely to die. Another example of responding to the environment would be like a Venus flytrap. Venus flytraps have like these little hairs on the ends of them. And when anything kind of just comes near or stimulates those little hairs, it knows to close itself. And that is the way that it catches food. Okay, it's responding to its environment. As soon as something touches it, it closes, and therefore it's going to be able to eat. Now, okay, we have two more. The next one is called homeostasis, or maintaining an internal balance, a stable internal balance. This could be body temperature. This could be the amount of sugar in your blood. This could be, the toxicity levels of your urine. So I have this picture on the side, and if you are ever, this is a true thing, right? If you're looking at your urine or your pee, and it's like this dark brown color, okay, that's extremely bad for you. Extremely, extremely bad for you. Okay, that means there's lots of toxins in your urine. If your urine is like nice and clear, then that probably means that you are well hydrated, you're exercising, there's not a lot of toxins in your urine or in your urinary tract. And so you're probably in a good place if your urine is a light yellow to clear color. Now, if your urine is completely yellow, kind of a, orange hue, that means you need to be drinking water. You need to get your body back to homeostasis. Okay, this is a huge indicator of whether or not your body is in homeostasis or maintaining its internal balance. If your urine is clear to light yellow, you're probably in homeostasis. If your urine is dark yellow to orange, you're probably not in homeostasis. You need to drink water. And if your urine is brown or any hues of red, like blood, that means you are not in homeostasis and you need to get water and be exercising and completely hydrate yourself and probably see a doctor. Okay. Same with blood sugars, for example, right? If my blood sugar is too high or too low, I could die. That's for anybody. And so if I'm in homeostasis, I'm going to have the correct amount or within a range of a certain number of particles of sugar in my blood at any given time. Okay, so that's homeostasis. And then finally, if you are biotic living, you have to be able to evolve or adapt to situations. The word evolve means to change over time. Okay. So again, we evolve to our environments, right? We say, okay, I have to adapt to this situation. And if I don't, I'm not going to survive. Right. So I'm going to play this little video real quick. I wonder if it'll play. It's not going to play. Okay.
Well, hello guys, it's Chris. From frogs coming back to life after being frozen to lizards that squirt blood out of their eyes. Ugh, here are 9 bizarre animal adaptations. Number 9. Wood frogs. There is a frog called the wood frog that does something rather odd when the cold season comes around. Despite its name, it does not turn into wood, but something kinda similar, I guess you could say. When the wood frog senses that cold temperatures are coming, its body will instantly freeze over. By freeze over, I do mean that literally. The water from inside its body will begin to freeze, and this new state that it finds itself in is so deceiving that if you were to go and find a wood frog after they'd frozen over, you'd think they were dead. They would have no reaction to you touching them. They would not be breathing, and you would not find a pulse inside of them, which begs the question, how do they get into this state? And the answer is temperature. When it's warm enough to melt them, they return to their regular living state. They can be up and hopping around in a matter of minutes, despite being frozen for several weeks or months, depending on their location. Number 8. Maned wolf. At first glance, the maned wolf that resides in South America looks and sounds like many different things. Its name alone would make you think that it's a wolf, but it's actually not. Its appearance in terms of its body would make you think it's a red fox, but it's not that either. The maned wolf is a unique member of the canid family, which does indeed include wolves and foxes. But this creature is not related to them in full, and they're their own unique species. Just take a look at their legs. As you can see, the legs are much longer than most foxes and wolves out in the wild. Some have even likened these legs to those of grazelings. The reasoning for these legs is a bit unclear. However, the more prevailing theory is that because the maned wolf lives in South America, the creature needed to deal with all the grass that was permeating the area. Thus,
Okay, so as you can see, those are two examples of adaptations that occur in the wild, right? Again, you either adapt to your surroundings or you're not going to survive. And again, this all has to do with staying alive. There are abiotic and biotic factors within every environment. Okay, those biotic factors are going to only be able to stay alive due to abiotic factors. How do I check to see if something is living? Okay, I'm going to check that it's made of cells, that those cells are organized, that it can reproduce sexually, asexually, or both, that it is based on a genetic code, that it can grow and develop, that it can use and break down through metabolism energy. It can respond to the environment. It maintains an internal balance called homeostasis, and that it can evolve or adapt to different environments that it is subjected to. Okay, so in class, we'll be doing an activity to see if you can apply all of these to different objects to see if something is biotic or abiotic.